I heard the lock click behind me. My heart jumped when I turned around and found Dylan standing there, his hand still on the doorknob, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. It was just the two of us in the house now, for the first time in months. The silence felt alive, pulsing between us. "Hey, we need to talk, Alex," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "My name is Alex Harrison, I'm 20, and I just got back home after my freshman year at college on the other side of the country. I grew up in this 2-story house in the Portland suburbs, where the scent of pine always invades the windows and the distant sound of the ocean soothes the nights. But something had changed. Or maybe someone had. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to see more stories like this. Dylan, my 25-year-old older brother, wasn't the same person I left behind. When I left, he still seemed like a kid grown too quickly, awkward with his long legs and easy smile. The man who greeted me at the door yesterday had broader shoulders, a more defined jawline, and a presence that filled the hall in a way that made me swallow hard. "Wow, someone's been working out," I joked to mask my discomfort, giving his arm a light punch. He just smiled sideways, picking up my suitcases as if they were weightless. "Welcome back, airhead." Our routines quickly fell into place. We woke up early, making coffee together in the yellow-tiled kitchen our mom refused to modernize. Dylan worked remotely as a software developer, while I spent my mornings reviewing material for the next semester. Our parents, James and Sarah, left for work early, leaving the house to us. It was during those mornings that I began to notice the subtle changes. The way Dylan's gaze would linger on me for an extra second when he thought I wasn't paying attention. How he found excuses to brush against my shoulder in our cramped kitchen. Or how his fingers would touch mine as he handed me a cup of coffee. Every accidental touch sent an inexplicable current across my skin. Every prolonged look made my breathing quicken. I tried to ignore those sensations, to bury them under layers of guilt and confusion. This was my brother. We grew up together, shared the same blood, the same childhood memories. On the third day, Dylan suggested we watch a movie after dinner. Our parents had gone out to dinner with friends, and the house was quiet except for the sound of rain pattering against the windows. "Just like old times," he said, flopping onto the couch next to me, much closer than necessary on that 3-seater. During the movie, I felt his arm casually slide along the backrest behind me, not touching me, but close enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin. I pretended to be absorbed by the screen, even though every one of my senses was fixed on his proximity. "You've changed," he murmured during a quiet scene. "In what way?" "There's something different about you. Maybe more confident. College has done you good." I turned to answer and found his face just inches from mine. The air between us felt thick, charged. For a moment, I thought he was going to, but then the phone rang, shattering the moment. On the 5th day, our parents announced they were going away for the weekend to celebrate their wedding anniversary. "Are you two really going to be alone?" Mom asked, as she was already loading suitcases into the car. "We're not kids anymore, Mom," Dylan replied, his shoulder brushing mine as we stood in the doorway saying goodbye. And now, here we were. The door to my room was locked, and Dylan stood in front of it, his intentions clear in his eyes. The tension that had been building for days had finally reached a critical point. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. Dylan stepped toward me, closing the gap. I caught a hint of his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something uniquely his. "I can't pretend anymore," he whispered, words I'll never forget. "I can't pretend anymore," he repeated, words I'll never forget. "I've been trying to ignore this since you got back, but I just can't anymore." I froze, torn between the urge to back away and an inexplicable pull to step even closer. My mind screamed that I should be horrified, yet my body reacted completely differently to his nearness. "Dylan, we're brothers," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "You think I don't know that?" he said, running his hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration I'd recognized since childhood. "You think I haven't fought this? That I haven't hated myself for months while you were away, realizing that the longing I felt wasn't normal?" The storm that had begun as a light drizzle was now battering the windows, the wind howling as if it shared our inner turmoil. A thunderclap shook the house, and the lights flickered for a moment. In that brief moment of darkness, I felt his breath on my face. "We should stop this conversation now," I said, but I didn't step away. "Before we say something we can't take back." Dylan took another step, eliminating the last bit of space between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body and noticed how his gray t-shirt outlined every contour of his torso. When had he developed those muscles? How had I not seen that my brother had transformed so completely into the man standing before me? "Just say you don't feel anything," he challenged, his eyes locked on mine. "Look me in the eyes and say you haven't felt this thing between us since you came back. Say that, and I'll never bring it up again." I tried to form the words. I really did. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. The truth was that since I returned, something had changed. It wasn't just Dylan who was different. It was the dynamic between us. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, carried a meaning that both frightened and intrigued me. "I can't say that," I finally admitted, the words coming out as if they had been ripped from me. His eyes softened, and I realized he had been holding his breath. Slowly, as if dealing with a frightened animal, Dylan reached up and touched my face. His fingers were surprisingly gentle against my cheek, despite the calluses formed from years of handling climbing gear. His hobby since we were teenagers. "Alex," he said, my name sounding like a prayer. "You don't know how long." I can't say who moved first. Maybe we both leaned in at the same time, magnets finally giving in to the invisible force between us. His lips met mine with hesitant tenderness that quickly turned urgent, more intense. My hands, which should have been pushing him away, grabbed his t-shirt and pulled him closer. The kiss tasted of the black coffee we shared after dinner, of prohibition, of something that had lain dormant within me for far too long. Part of my mind remained clear enough to shout that this was wrong, that we should stop immediately, but that voice was drowned out by the roar of my blood and the wild heat spreading through my body. Dylan's hands slid down to my waist, his fingers finding the skin beneath my shirt. The contact sent shivers down my spine. He took my reaction as hesitation and pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine for confirmation. "We can stop," he said, though the reluctance in his voice was obvious. "If it's too much," I answered by pulling him back, capturing his lips with an intensity that surprised us both. There was no room left for rational thoughts, for moral or social considerations. There was only the moment, the storm both inside and outside the house, and the desire that had grown between us like its own living thing. We began moving toward my bedroom, an awkward dance heading for the bed. My legs reached the edge of the mattress, and we tumbled together in a tangle of limbs and heavy breaths. Dylan's weight on top of me should have felt oppressive, but instead, I felt anchored, present in a way I had never experienced before. His hands explored my body with a mix of reverence and urgency. Every touch seemed to awaken nerves I didn't know I had, sending waves of pleasure that left me dizzy. When he pulled my shirt off, the cool air of the room met my heated skin, creating a contrast that magnified every sensation. "You're perfect," he murmured against my neck, his voice husky with desire. I wanted to say that he was perfect, with his broad shoulders, defined abs, and that dark patch of hair running down from his navel that always caught my eye when he stepped out of the shower wrapped in a towel. But the words felt inadequate, insufficient to express the whirlwind of emotions consuming me. Instead, I let my hands do the talking, tracing the contours of his body, marveling at the way he responded to my touch. A moan escaped his lips when my fingers slid across his chest, and that sound filled me with a power I had never known. Our movements became more urgent, guided by a primitive instinct that overwhelmed our inexperience. Clothes were discarded, tossed aside in the room like the last barriers of hesitation between us. When we were finally skin against skin, the feeling was overwhelming. Like diving into deep water and discovering, against all odds, that you know how to swim. Dylan touched me as if he were memorizing every inch of my body, as if he were discovering an uncharted territory he'd long imagined but never explored. His lips traced feverish paths along my chest, my abdomen, descending further, drawing out gasps and tremors I tried, unsuccessfully, to control. "Can I?" he asked, looking up, his eyes seeking permission. I nodded, unable to form coherent words. What followed was an explosion of sensations that made me arch my back and clutch the sheets tightly. The way his mouth brought me to heights of pleasure I'd never reached made me wonder if he had imagined this moment as many times as I had, rehearsing every move in his mind. But I didn't want to be just a passive receiver. With a strength I didn't know I had, I reversed our positions, pressing him against the mattress. The surprise on his face quickly gave way to an expression of pure delight when I began returning his attentions, exploring his body with a blend of curiosity and desire. "Alex," he moaned, my name turning into a plea on his lips. The power of that moment intoxicated me, seeing my older brother, always so controlled and composed, completely surrendering to the pleasure I was giving him. Every sigh, every muscle contraction under my hands was a victory, a treasure I would keep forever. When it came time for our complete union, there was a pause, a moment of crystal clarity amid the haze of desire. We looked into each other's eyes, silently acknowledging the line we were about to cross, a line from which there would be no return. "Are you sure?" Dylan asked, his voice trembling slightly. In response, I pulled him in for another kiss, communicating my answer without words. He reached for the drawer on the bedside table, retrieving what was needed to make the moment more comfortable for both of us. The care with which he prepared me, the patience in his movements, only deepened the bond forming between us. When we finally became one, it felt like complete fulfillment, as if a piece of me I never knew was missing had finally found its place. We moved in perfect synchrony, as if we had been rehearsing that dance our whole lives. The initial pain quickly gave way to a pleasure growing stronger with each movement, each shared sigh. Dylan kept his eyes on mine, forging a connection that transcended the physical. In that moment of ultimate vulnerability, I saw in his gaze something that took my breath away. A love so deep, so complete, that it defied every social convention. "I love you," he whispered against my lips, the words coming out between the rhythm of our movements. "I always have." Those words unlocked something inside me. The pleasure reached an impossible crescendo, waves of ecstasy running through my body like electricity. I felt Dylan trembling against me, his climax coinciding with mine in a perfect synchrony that seemed cosmically orchestrated. For an endless moment, we existed outside of time and space, our bodies and souls fused into one single entity. The storm outside raged at its peak, but we could barely hear it above the sound of our breathing and rapid heartbeats. Afterwards, we lay entwined, neither of us willing to be the first to break the spell. Dylan's fingers traced lazy patterns on my skin as we caught our breath. The rain had dwindled to a soft drizzle, as if nature itself had calmed along with us. "What are we thinking?" I finally asked, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. Dylan pulled me closer, his heart pounding steadily against mine. "I'm not thinking. I don't want to think right now." But reality was beginning to creep back in, bringing with it all the questions we had momentarily pushed aside. What had we done? How would we move forward from here? What would this mean for us, for our family? "This changes everything," I murmured against his shoulder. He nodded, his fingers twisting in my hair. "I know." We sat in silence for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. The moon had emerged from behind dispersing clouds, casting silver shadows through the window onto the room. I saw Dylan's profile illuminated by that ethereal light, his features relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. "I don't regret it," he said finally, turning to look at me. "Maybe I should, but I just can't." I studied his face, searching for signs of doubt or remorse, but found only a calm certainty that somehow quieted my internal storm. "I don't regret it either." And it was true. Despite all the implications, all the complications that were sure to come, I couldn't regret what we'd shared. It was like having slept through my whole life and finally waking up, seeing the world in colors I'd never known existed. Dylan rested on his elbow, looking at me with renewed intensity. "What do we do now?" It was the question with no answer. The outside world, with its rules and judgments, seemed so distant in that moment, though I knew that eventually we would have to face it. Our parents would be back in 2 days. Life would continue, and we'd have to navigate unknown, dangerous waters. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." He smiled, a bittersweet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't want to lose you either. Not ever." We sealed that promise with another kiss, softer now, more deliberate. The desire was still there, pulsing beneath the surface, but it had been temporarily sated, giving way to something deeper, more complex. While I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, I realized that we had passed a point of no return. Whatever the future held, for acceptance or rejection, for happiness or pain, we would face it together. Dylan fell asleep first, his arms still wrapped around me as if he were afraid I might vanish during the night. I remained awake a little longer, watching his familiar yet completely new face relax in sleep. At some point, I too gave in to exhaustion, sinking into a deep, dreamless sleep, more peaceful than any I could remember. I woke before dawn, that hazy hour when the world seems suspended in time. For a moment, I was disoriented, confused by the weight of Dylan's arm on my waist, the warmth of his body against my back. Then the memories of the night before flooded my mind, and I felt a simultaneous wave of ecstasy and panic. I carefully slid out of his embrace, needing space to gather my thoughts. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his breath. In sleep, he looked so much younger, almost like the brother I'd known all my life before everything changed. I walked over to the window and pulled aside the curtain. The world outside was washed by the rain from the night before, the sky gradually brightening on the horizon. The droplets on the leaves sparkled like thousands of little diamonds catching the first rays of sunlight. It was unsettling how the outside world could look exactly the same when everything inside me had been completely transformed. What had we done? The question echoed in my mind, impossible to ignore in the light of a new day. Despite the comfort and certainty I'd felt in Dylan's arms the night before, reality was imposing itself with full force. We were brothers. We shared the same parents, the same family history. What we felt for each other was something that society universally condemns, something that could tear our family apart if discovered. "Alex?" Dylan's sleepy voice brought me back to the present. He was sitting on the bed, hair a mess, eyes looking at me with a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Are you okay?" I realized I was hugging myself, as if trying to protect myself. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm processing." He nodded slowly, respecting my space, though I could see the desire in his eyes to pull me back onto the bed, to pretend the outside world didn't exist just for a few more hours. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I sat down in the desk chair, deliberately keeping some distance between us. I needed to think clearly, and that seemed impossible when we were so close. "What we did last night," I began hesitantly. "It was incredible. I've never felt anything like it. But it's taboo," he finished when I hesitated. "Forbidden. Wrong by almost every social norm." I nodded, relieved he understood, relieved I wasn't denying the gravity of the situation. "You know what's strange?" I continued. "I don't feel guilty. I should, right? I should be feeling awful, disgusted even. But I'm not, and that scares me more than anything." Dylan ran a hand over his face, a gesture I recognized as his way of organizing his thoughts. "I've been wrestling with this for months, Alex. Even before you came back home. I thought it was just, I don't know, some confusing phase. I tried going out with other people, tried to smother these feelings. Nothing worked." His words sparked an unexpected twinge of jealousy in me. The thought of Dylan with someone else, sharing intimacy, bothered me in a way I never thought I was allowed to feel. "When you left for college," he continued, "it was like a part of me went with you. At first, I thought it was just normal brotherly longing, but over time, I realized it was something deeper, something more complete." I absorbed his words, recognizing in them an echo of my own confused feelings during the months I'd been away. The lonely nights in the dorm when I thought of him more than anyone else. The way my heart skipped a beat whenever I got a message from him. The disappointment when our phone calls ended. "What do we do now?" I asked, echoing the same question from the night before, this time with more urgency, more weight. Dylan got up, putting on just his jeans, and walked over to the window where I had been standing moments before. The morning light highlighted every contour of his torso, every muscle beneath his skin. I had to look away to keep my composure. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to suggest we keep exploring this between us, see where it leads, but the rational part knows that eventually someone would find out. Mom and Dad come back tomorrow. How could we hide something like this from them? How could we live a life together without anyone knowing the truth?" His words laid out all the practical impossibilities that I was also considering. Even if we embraced our feelings, even if we decided that the love we felt was worth the risk, how would it work in the real world? Would we live hidden forever? Would we lie to everyone around us? "Do you regret it?" I asked, almost in a whisper. Dylan turned to look at me, his eyes intense and clear. "No. And that's the problem, isn't it? I don't regret a single thing that happened between us. If I could go back in time, I'd do it all over again. Every touch, every kiss. Even knowing it complicates everything. Even knowing it could destroy us." I stood and walked over to him, unable to resist the pull drawing me in. When I was just inches away, I stopped, still hesitant. "Maybe we should take a break," I suggested, the words hurting as they left my lips. "You could ask for a transfer at work. I could request campus housing for next semester. Maybe with some distance, these feelings will fade a little." The pain that crossed his face was almost physical. "Is that really what you want? Distance?" "No," I admitted. It's the last thing I want. But maybe it's what we need. He raised a hand, hesitating, then gently touched my face. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch like a plant reaching for the sun. And what if they don't fade? He asked softly. What if, even with oceans between us, we still feel the same? What if we spend years trying to deny something that just won't go away? I had no answer to that. The prospect of years apart, both of us silently suffering, seemed as unbearable as the complications of being together. I'm scared, I confessed. Not just of what others would think, but of what this says about us. About who we really are. Dylan nodded, his fingers still caressing my cheek. I'm scared too, but I'm more afraid of losing what we discovered, of going back to that emptiness I felt before you came home. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, existing in that in-between space where the world's rules didn't seem to apply. Maybe we don't have to decide everything right now, he murmured. Maybe we can just exist for today. And tomorrow, when Mom and Dad come back, we go back to being just brothers in the eyes of the world. And in the meantime, we figure out what we really want. It was a temporary solution, a way to postpone the inevitable. But in that moment, it felt like the only option that didn't involve immediate pain. Okay, I agreed. Just for today. This time, I closed the gap between us, capturing his lips in a kiss that carried all the conflicting emotions inside me. Desire and fear, certainty and doubt, love and guilt. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between our bodies. The rest of the day passed like a dream. We made breakfast together, our bodies constantly brushing in the small kitchen. We walked around the back property, where the pines formed a natural barrier against curious eyes. We talked like never before, sharing secrets and desires we'd kept hidden for years. And when night came, we made love again, this time without the desperate urgency of the first time, but with a deliberate care, memorizing every sensation, every moment, as if it could be the last. Now, lying next to him, I watch the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he sleeps. Tomorrow, our parents will return. Tomorrow, we'll have to put on our masks again and pretend nothing has changed. Tomorrow, we begin the real fight. Against the world, against society, maybe even against ourselves. I don't know what the future holds for us. Whether eventually we'll decide the price is too high and go our separate ways. Whether we'll find a way to be together despite everything. Whether the love we feel is strong enough to defy all the obstacles that will surely come. All I know is that at this very moment, with Dylan beside me, I feel complete in a way I never imagined possible. And a part of me wonders, how can something that feels so right be considered so wrong by the rest of the world? And you, in my place, what would you do? Would you step back, pretending nothing happened, slipping back into the safety of a life that fits all the rules? Or would you stay, embracing this forbidden love, regardless of the cost and consequences? Subscribe to the channel and hit like to see more stories like this. While sleep finally claimed me, I realized that no matter which path we choose, nothing will ever be the same again. That click of the lock last night not only closed the door to my room, it opened a door inside me that can never be shut again.